Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Adam Block, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and this is an open meeting of the Needham Council of Economic Advisors, and specifically the Cluster-Based Economic Development Subcommittee. And our meeting today is being conducted remotely, consistent with the current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless required by law. This particular meeting will not have public comment. First, we'll confirm that all members of the subcommittee are present. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative with present. Stu Agler.
Present.
Jeremy Halpern.
Present.
The chair, Adam Block, is present. We anticipate Dylan Ayada joining imminently, and here he is. We'll give him a second to come in. Meanwhile, we'll note that Amy, for the minutes that
I'm here, Adam. Thanks.
Oh, good, perfect. So, Dylan, I'm going to say your name one more time, and when I do, I'm going to ask you to respond in the affirmative that you are present. Dylan Adia.
Present.
There we go. Well done. Thank you. And again, I was just saying for the record that that Bill Day who is another member of this subcommittee, has responded that he is unable to attend today. I also would like to introduce our economic development manager, Amy Hilson.
Morning.
Thank you very much. Obviously, with that, she is present. For others participating in the meeting, also please be aware that other people may be able to see you and hear you. Anything that you share or state will be a matter of public record. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available for the town's website, which is needhamma.gov. That's needhamma.gov, unless otherwise noted. Some brief ground rules. The ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. I'll introduce if we have other speakers on the agenda, and after they've concluded their remarks, each board member will be asked for any comment, questions, or motions. So with that, I am going to bring up our agenda, which I had printed, but unfortunately, my printer isn't working. I've got to reset it, but that's neither here nor there. So the first item on our agenda is the introduction roll call. We've clicked that off the box. And what I thought to do first we're going to chat about this cluster-based economic development committee. And I wanted to just chat a little bit about why we're talking about cluster-based economic development and how that fits into the activity on the CEA. And I'm not sure. Are you people familiar with cluster-based the principle of cluster-based economic? Okay, so I see Jeremy shaking his head and Stu's nodding, but I'll give it a go for now. So very simply put, the concept is designed around it's an economic development concept that is designed to create a competitive advantage within different industry sectors. And it's really typically part of a broader regional economic development strategy. But I thought that it's one way to look at our economy with the goal of which is to determine what are our active sectors in our local economy. And we'll also review once we were able to categorize our business inventory, which is to say, based on and we'll jump into this momentarily. Amy picked up on a document that a number of students from Babson a couple of years ago had begun, and that was a business inventory, and we now have roughly a little less than 2,000 businesses in town. So our goals are going to be, one, to categorize all of those businesses. It's possible, based on the source of the data and the date of the data, that that's not 100% accurate. And it may never be 100% accurate. It may always be 85 or 90%. Jeremy, I'll come to you in 1 second. But once we do have, but we're going to start with what we have, and we're going to continue to perfect it, and we'll figure out some kind of a strategy to perfect it on an ongoing basis. But for now, we'll start with that, and then we're going to categorize into different economic sectors or industrial sectors all of those businesses, and then we can start to do an analysis and determine, is 20% of our economy financial services or legal? Is 10% of our economy automotive based? That's service and sales. Is 25% of our economy is retail, 10% is separately restaurants, and when we can look at that, when we analyze that information, we step back, we can start to plot on a chart. If we have, for instance, life science businesses in town, we have information technology businesses in town. We have, so we've got biotech, life sciences, information technology, and there are some subspecialties. And when we're looking at this, we can identify what's the food chain, the life cycle in information technology. And we can determine what other businesses in that food chain that support that little mini cluster we have and what's missing. Part of that will involve interviewing some local business executives, and get an understanding from them about what other businesses would be helpful, and then it can help the town, including Amy, the select board, the town manager, the chief information officer. We can recommend some type of economic development program or certain specific initiatives that can attract some of those other businesses in town with a goal of expanding that cluster and expand on a competitive advantage that we have in Needham. So we will have a couple of competitive advantages. We have amazing access to public transportation with the commuter line and the bus. We're about to have a second hospital with a lot of medical staff directly in our town. We have also, with transportation, we have easy access to the highway system. We also have a substantial amount of wealth locally, and we also have a number of executives. So it's as other towns like Wellesley, Newton, and Brookline also have, and yet there are certain parts of our economy is dependent a little differently than Brookline and Wellesley, and we want to understand what the economy is today and what we can recommend for the future, because it'll overall create more jobs for town, and it will create more diverse jobs in town, and it will create, therefore, a better mix of businesses. Part of the thing that we'll look at when we're I guess finished our analysis is we'll be able to cross-check some of the goals with another subcommittee that we have, which is the district refocused subcommittee that looks at the different zoning districts and start to see what's happening and whether we're aligned or not with with those goals as well. So that's the strategy of what we're kind of dealing with. Jeremy, you had a question before. I see your hand is down, but I still want to recognize you.
Thanks. I recognize you too. So the document that was sent around already has things categorized by, I would call it common language grouping: food service, grocery store, dentist, etc. There are, I see fields that use the SEIC codes, which I hate and I think are useless for any actual purpose in life, unless you're the federal government.
Why do you say that, by the way?
They're using, whoever designed them, they wrote these things like 50 years ago and they just don't apply in any useful way. So I don't think we should be in any way bound by those codes unless somebody tells me there's some program we're trying to fit ourselves into where we need to.
I will say that was there were two national standards for business categorization. Was it NIAC one? I can't remember offhand, but there were two. And although neither was perfect, it was one basis upon which to be able to group as many businesses as possible. But continue, because your point is valid and we may want to recategorize these, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I want to ask, are we trying to further, one possibility could be we have a list, we've done a first pass and we need to better refine what's in what bucket. The second is that we want to redefine what the buckets are and kind of go back de novo through it and make sure that we're assigning things. I'm not sure which thing you're suggesting we need to do.
Well, I'll ask Amy some questions about it, and that will kind of help determine which way we go. Amy, sorry to put you on the spot here.
Not at all.
We've had about this before.
So the buckets that you are referring to, the different tabs at the bottom, I sort of created those just because when I needed very targeted lists of businesses for one reason or the other. So perhaps the public health department was reaching out to me and say, asking for contact information for certain clusters in town to reach out to them for messaging, or that was just one example, but I sort of did that. So these clusters were taken from the master list. So there was not necessarily a thorough approach to it as far as, I mean, it hasn't been broken out substantially. It's not, automotive's not there. I mean, there's a lot of clusters. These have sort of been done along the way as I needed to, and I just kept them there just for ease of being able to access.
Okay, so one substance, one process. As a process point, it looks like we may be doing more work than we need to be doing in it. We can create a master list where you have multiple columns that you can pull down and say, check the box on a predefined set of taxonomy fields. And then if something fits into more than one bucket, then it gets tagged in multiple buckets. And then you can have those other tabs auto-populate from the master list so that you're not, all you need to do to change where one shows up is just change the pull down rather than having to go copy and paste and just make life easier.
Mm-hmm.
You mean the filter function on the columns?
So you can certainly do it on the filter, but you can actually you can do pivot tables in those other tabs so that it basically says, I look at the master list and I only include things that meet the following criteria.
Well, it looks like with Stu nodding and your explanation that we have like a PhD level of Excel capabilities already.
Not it.
Stu was first.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Genevieve. It makes a lot of sense. I think the real question that still remains, so maybe back to your process or whatever question, is to what level of detail do we want to go in this?
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the concerns I've had over the past is we try to refine this thing too deep.
Too far.
Gets us, kind of caught up in the data.
Yeah.
That's true.
That was my substance question is, I think, being driven by, and Amy, you're probably the right person to answer the question, which is, what are the things we're trying to do with this list, rather than to be like pinpoint precision perfect about all the ways we could describe, a television station, right? Like, is it a technology company? Is it is it entertainment? Like, I don't know. I don't care. I want to know, like, what is it that we need out of this? And let's define categories in just a way that we find to be reasonable. So I just did this, we just did a project through Tufts where we were looking at every food technology company in Massachusetts. And we created a sub-taxonomy, and we thought about that for a few weeks about what's the right way to group stuff. And then we just got to the business of throwing things into buckets. Because otherwise I think we could be here for 2 years doing nothing.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah, so totally valid. So there's a short-term and a long-term answer. The short-term answer is I want to know the name of the business and the industry. That's really the core thing in the short term. The long term, we want to be able to have updated data on a go-forward basis, for instance, on the number of employees. I'm not sure that the amount of sales is necessarily significant to us or not, at least not yet. So I'm not worried about that. We want to make sure that we have the address correctly, because that address we can then pull up and we can see which zones it's in.
Yep.
So someone, in the medium term can turn around, look at this and say, in our center business district, we have, of the 2,000 businesses in town, we have 1,000 businesses. And of those 1,000 businesses, this is what the mix looks like. 20% is, 60% is food and entertainment.
I'm with it.
Okay.
Let me suggest a couple of things when I looked at that list that I noticed that we probably, if we're going through this, we may as well do it just once, and just no particular order. And we can come back to each of these, but let me just kind of get them out of my brain. Number one, the zoning was unclear to me what that meant, and whether or not we're like, we've looked at that address.
Very simply, when the students were initially entering the data, they were entering based on the address of the business, what zoning district. The town has a number of different districts. There is, resident, single family, single residence A, single residence B, general residence, apartment residence. Right. Those are like the residential ones. And then there are a number of business districts.
So some people fall into 4 buckets.
Yes, because there are overlays.
Okay.
And they may be both residential and commercial. And it's also possible that some of the tags are wrong.
Okay. So the other stuff I think we might want to capture is, to the extent that we can know a thing, is it women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, or disabled-owned? And again, that might be, you might need 4 columns, so someone might fit 4 boxes.
Hold on one second. Just logistically, Amy, are you making a note of that? Okay, thank you. Good. Jeremy, continue.
I think as you, I don't know if it is possible, but it might be interesting to know the duration of the business. How long has it been either alive or in that location? I think we also did a smart thing by saying, and not we, Amy, you did a smart thing by saying, there's a Needham center grouping. We might consider, irrespective of zoning, creating, some additional area information, which is in some cases a lot more useful than what the zoning is, right? Like, so there's the other side of 95 corridor, there's Needham Junction, there's Needham Heights, there's, Needham West, or whatever it is we call that. I don't even know what we call that. What do we call the area like near and beyond Newman? Wellesley.
Oh, that's like the Heights.
I always think of the Heights as north as opposed to west, but.
Well, it depends which way Central Avenue bends and which section you're on. Anyways, but yeah, so go ahead. We have different.
I think creating, no more than maybe 6 or so geographic categories in addition to center might be useful, because one of the things we might be trying to do is figure out, not just how many do we have in town, but how many do we have in a particular area, which might make more
So
sense
that-
given what we might be doing.
That's why we have those zones. That's the zone. The
Yeah, but
dis-
again, the zoning is a different question, right? Because the zoning might be,
we're not talking about dimensionals or uses. We're just talking about the geographic. Every district has a geography.
okay,
And that's what we're looking at it. So when it says it's in the industrial district or it's in mixed use 128, then we know precisely what geography we're talking about. That's the geographic.
okay. I defer when you say we to you, but sure.
Well, that's how the town looks at the geography.
Okay, I'm just suggesting that there's the real estate side of it, and then there's the community side of it. And if those real estate zoning groupings are not a good proxy for how people think of the community, then I think we just ought to be thoughtful about, what that means.
So colloquially, people look at the heights as one area, and which is the area specifically with the zip code ending 02494.
Yep.
And then, but people colloquially may include different other areas. Some people, there's not a ton of consistency, but that's the basis for it. And then the rest is typically the rest of Needham. But some other people also categorize the town geographically based on the school district. But for the purposes of business, because all of these businesses are regulated in town, the standard ought to be the zoning geography.
Yeah, and a good example would be, I don't know if there are more than one zone on the other side of 95. I don't know if that's considered a
Yes,
single
there are.
zone. Yeah, but my point is, you use the word colloquially, I think that's a perfectly good word, right? Colloquially, people think of that as one area, regardless of what their particular piece of property might sit in. And so I'm just suggesting it's a useful thing, and again, hopefully an easy thing where we can go down and it's a very quick check the box, but then we can create groupings that we don't have to go back through later.
I hear what you're saying. That's a good note. Go ahead.
The other thing is, this is just maybe so sorry, let me back up. Two things. One is, I know that there are some things in here that we know are gone, like 7-Eleven jumped off the list at me.
Yep.
I don't know whether there's others in here, but do we know how current this is, or that's one of the tasks?
It's been an ongoing process. It's kind of like going down a rabbit hole. I spend some time on this list, and then I find myself
without getting into any kind of justification, do you have a sense of, just empirically, if this is 80% accurate or
I would say
accurate?
I would say it's at least 75% accurate, if not a little higher. So I do have a tab for businesses that have closed or moved that I take off the master list, and I'll dump them in there. And I often find that, in looking at duplicates, so basically anything that's highlighted in yellow, I'm going through, and there's dupes, and I need to figure out, which one to keep and which one to delete. And I often find I go to the Secretary of State and I'll look up in the corporation's database, and I'll find out that they don't even exist in Needham anymore. So it's the original work was done by a group of Babson students, and that was 2 years ago. I had a high school student helping me for a short while last year, and then he sort of disappeared and didn't resurface. And so this has sort of been one of those things where, I try to find time to go in and spend an hour here or there to clean this up, but it's always going to be one of those things that's going to be constantly changing because business is opening.
My goal here, I think if we're at any moment 95% or better, we've won. What I would say is, we have a massive wealth of parent track talent in this town who also have the actual knowledge of whether these businesses are alive or dead, as opposed to a Babson student. And
What do
so,
you mean? What do you mean a parent track?
meaning folks who, were in the work world and are now home with kids and are dying to do anything that doesn't involve,
Oh,
Dora the Explorer. And so my guess is you could probably find some really good volunteers who'd be willing to just, even if they're just spot checking the list, who can go through and say, I know that that's closed, or I know that that's moved. And, we can leverage that talent. I don't see any reason why people wouldn't volunteer some time to do it.
that's an interesting idea. Okay. So,
Can I just for a second get back to Jeremy's point about the SIC codes? And I agree with you. In fact, there has been several instances where the data was pulled from US Biz data. And you'll have identical, you'll have the duplicate two companies, the exact same information. So I know it's the same, and they have two completely different SIC codes.
Yep.
So it's sort of like, well, which one's right? So in some ways, I almost think that we should scrap the SIC codes.
Yeah, unless you need it for some application for something where you're trying to track. I mean, I put it this way, I don't suppose there's any harm in leaving it in there, but I wouldn't spend 1 minute further updating it. You can just hide the field, frankly, and then ignore it from now until it becomes relevant. So I talked about minority, women, disabled, veteran owned. If there's other categories of ownership that we think we ought to be tracking, I'd be interested to know. I had thought about like student owned, but that just didn't seem relevant enough. But if there's, do we care whether people are owners who live outside NIDA?
so that is an interesting data point. And Stu, you might be muted. You're still muted.
How is it that get that data though? I mean, a lot of times it's ownership is by a company or by it's hard to know. That's a lot of work, I guess is my point, is if you're going to go down 4 levels to find the owner and where they live. I'm not sure, the relevant, if that's the highest of priority items. And I think it'll take a lot of time to get it.
To that point, we're going to focus on the address of the business and classify that as a NIDA business and move on.
Sure, and I think as we're doing this, particularly if we can get some volunteer help, I think we can create a priority list of what are we trying to do. And then, if people have time to do non-essential stuff, but that's interesting or useful, great, we do that at the end, right? But I have a problem with prioritizing.
But Jeremy, should we do that right here? I mean, or is that like a subsequent meeting? I mean, to me, like we have this data set, and the question is, what do we want to grab out of it to start with? I agree with you. I think there's 25 interesting things that we could look at, but what are the top 3 or 4 that we want to focus on initially? And we may need to, as you point out, resort the data or reclassify in some way to get to that kind of nugget of good stuff, right? But I think that there's a lot of things that we can glean out of this. Some will take more work than less, but what do we collectively think is the most valuable things that we can get out of this data set?
Sure. So I had 2 additional things that I do think go to that point. One of which is I'd like to track who's got liquor licenses.
That though, don't you?
I'm sorry?
Amy has that.
Yeah, again, it should be that if you go down that food service list, this should be something that takes, at best 20 minutes probably of going through.
It's a lot. To go through 2,000 entries takes more than 20 minutes, but the point's well taken. I just want to step back for a second.
Again, it's only 160 entries on the food service side.
I think that I'd be surprised. It's only that. I guess that makes sense, which would be what? That's 1% of the businesses, right?
Yeah, and I don't think other than and even this Trader Joe's doesn't have liquor, right? So none of the retailers, the grocery stores don't carry
alcohol. That's alcohol. Right. But I alcohol right now is not a critical data point for me.
I'll tell you why I care, because I think there's still been a lot of talk about what are we doing about outdoor dining? What are we doing about freeing up liquor licenses? There's questions around the social equity of who's getting those licenses and expansion. I just think if we have that information in there, it's a useful thing. And again, I don't see this as a very long process, right? And you probably know off the top of your head who of these has licenses and who doesn't.
I do actually. I have a whole separate, I'm looking at a different spreadsheet here that I have from the Office of Town Manager. Anybody, it's the license information. So it's not a huge volume. I mean, package store license, we have right now 6, I'm sorry, 7, 8. And then as far as pouring licenses, there's under 25. So it's not a huge volume.
Again, the goal here, just from a process, is that we're only manipulating the master list, and then all the sub lists are just a question of what we tell it to populate.
Based on
You
the
know,
master list,
yeah.
right?
Anyway, so Stu, your point, you asked the question of what is the purpose of the categorization. Adam started the meeting by saying first goal was categorizing existing business, and the second was how do we attract businesses in underserved clusters, which I took to mean cluster per area, effectively, right? Cluster per geography.
But not specifically in in a particular zoning district.
Understood.
Okay.
Yep. So the question is like, how do we, what are we trying to categorize them for in order to make those determinations? I don't think we need a tremendous number of new categories in the taxonomy that Amy's used here. We probably need maybe another 4 or 5, but I don't think, there's no point in having 50 categories.
So there,
Or like, Amy, what you don't have is like, apparel and craft retail.
well, what I would like to see retail, where we have dentists, I want to broaden it out to medical. And then we don't have.
Excuse me for 1 second. Amy, was there a reason you picked dentist as a subset, or just because we had a bunch of them?
It was actually a request that I had, I believe it was from the health department, to send out specific correspondence to dentists in town. If my memory serves correctly, this is going back during the height of the pandemic. So
It served a different purpose beyond ours.
yes.
Which is fine.
Okay.
So, but medical is important. Then I also want biotech. I want life science. I want information technology, and Jeremy, you may have some other specific type of information.
What do you mean is the distinction between biotech and life science?
We can chat about that for a minute. Biotech. Biotech would be, for instance, my sensor for my diabetes that's produced by Dexcom, which is a medical device that that provides data on my blood sugar level on my watch and my iPhone. Another example.
Just for industry, that's considered med tech or med device, not biotech. So biotech is usually referred to only for therapeutics companies. These are people working on molecules.
You mean chemical engineering?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's biology, but yeah. So that's, biotech is usually looking at biomolecular processes, as opposed to med tech is the larger grouping of things other than health IT that are device diagnostic or in vitro combo products. So I would say if you're going to track it, I would just say there's a difference between biotech, med tech, and health IT are 3 separate groups.
We may only be able to really get, we have to remember we have very limited manpower, poor choice of words, I apologize. And I'd love to be able, if we could get to that point, that's great. But I think we may need to keep it a bit more broad than that.
So when we did a lot of work at the state, the general groupings were life sciences broadly defined, which includes both biotech, med tech, and health IT. Clean tech, which often is looking at very big, infrastructure type projects, and then other technology, which is software, hardware, consumer consumer digital, any of that stuff. So
Services.
if you chose those three groups, that would cover the vast majority of the innovation economy. There's always something that doesn't quite fit, but those three will get you most of the way there.
So that's kind of where we want to be. So maybe we don't specify, biotech. We talk about it in terms of life sciences as a broader group. That's fine.
Yeah, that'd be my suggestion.
So there are some additional categories that we do want to track. We don't, another example would be financial services. I don't know if we include legal there or elsewhere. And then another category for other services, like for instance, if there is if there are 10 education consultant businesses, that would be an other type of service. We also have, insurance. Does that go under business services? And then
I wouldn't subdivide that, and just because I think, again, you'll get to too many categories. So I think if you have a professional services category,
right, and that would include insurance,
bankers, lawyers,
legal,
accountants. You got it.
Yeah, I think that's a good category.
Just because it's a hot topic, we probably do want to separately list out all the banks so that everybody can yell about it later.
I just actually had a conversation last night after town meeting about we have too many banks in town.
This is what I keep hearing. So
and
we want to have a list.
But and that does speak to the sense of retail mix in town. And I pointed out to this gentleman that there are a ton of critics, but none of those critics have the gumption, to start a business of their own, take on the risk, get a business loan, put their own equity in, take equity out of their house to invest and develop a product or service, staff it up, acquire it, find the space, and be responsible for a 5-year lease. It's easy for people to criticize. It's hard for people to actually launch a business, and so I think that the best ability is, for change is greater density. The more density we have, particularly along our transportation hubs, the greater the mix of retail that will follow. But until then, how much intervention in a hyper local economy does a municipality want to play in? I think that's a real question. And ask 5 people, you might get 5 different answers. But we'll put those banks. We will have a list of the banks because they will be part of. And later on, we can subsort, as you're saying. You said there were 2 other things. I think we hit one of them. Did we hit both of them?
I have lost our thread, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We either did or we didn't.
Okay, that's true. Good options. So let me just pull this back up. So we do what I would like us to do is spend a few minutes. Amy, we've just roundtabled a number of different broader categories. So life science is one, IT is another.
Would it be helpful for me? I just wrote them all down to share them in an email, and so we can all decide on what the major categories should be that I can circulate.
In an email, identify the main categories we currently have, the ones that you already have, and then the additional ones that we spoke of, and then we can all email into Amy. And when Amy sends an email, by the way, this is probably a little more new information for you, Dylan, and for Jeremy. Stu's been around a while and a little bit more familiar with this. We have what's called an open meeting law, which says that if you have a number of people communicating even by email, you have a quorum, and therefore you're supposed to actually have a noticed open meeting. And the way around that to ensure compliance with the law is when a scenario like this, when Amy sends out an email, never hit reply all, only reply to Amy, and you couldn't copy me as chair or whoever is next chair. But that's the extent of it. So you generally reply to Amy, and that's fine. So there are going to be some on the master list, and maybe do we even have it on the grocery store list? Yeah, the 7-Eleven. We do actually have a 7-Eleven, in town, so it's not unreasonable to have that. We used to have two, but now we only have one. So ideally, what I would love us to do is each of us take in a random, so there's 5 of us now, each of us take 25 rows. It could be something like, Stu, you take 100 to 125. Jeremy, you take 200 to 225. Amy, you take 300 to 325. Dylan, you take 400 to 425, and I'll do the same at 500. And we'll do a spot check, and then we'll get together at our next meeting, and we'll determine the accuracy in that spot check. It's not to say that we're going to change anything. It's
what are we spot checking, Adam?
So it's almost like an audit of the information, and in particular, it's really, does the business exist, and is it located where it says that it is. So if I were to look up Baker's Best, and I do a search on Google Maps, A, does it still come up? B, is it, can we confirm it's at 150 Gould Street? Which is interesting. I wonder, Amy, if that, because I don't recall it being on Gould Street. I wonder if that's their manufacturing facility. Although I might be I'm thinking of Bagel's Best, different than Baker's Best. Okay.
Yes, it's easy to get them confused.
Correct. So forgive me for that. So having said that, we just want to just confirm, does the business exist and is in the right address? That's all I care about for now, because that will help us come back. Because I think when Amy, you said it's probably 75, I think we want to have a little bit more clear understanding on how accurate it is. So, and I don't want to overburden people over the next, few weeks. So if we could each take, 25 entries, that's fine. So Amy, in your email to the group as a follow-up to this, I'm going to randomly select in the order that I see people on the screen. Jeremy, I'm going to assign you, let's say, Amy, I think from 2, Jeremy's going to be 2 to 27. Stu, I'd like you to be 100 to 125. Dylan, I'd like you to be 200 to 225. Amy, I'd like you to do 300 to 325. And I'll take 400 to 425. And we'll just start with that. And then, it could be that, Stu, you come back and say, of the 25, 23 are accurate. And then Dylan, you might say the same. Jeremy, you might say 10% are accurate. The other businesses don't exist. Amy, you'll say it's 80%, and then we'll have an idea. We'll average it out, and then we know roughly how accurate it is. And then that will also determine what other additional work we need to do, and how, in order to perfect it. And then we may have to have a conversation about how do we perfect it. And Jeremy, you brought up an interesting alternative or initiative to try and recruit some other family, non-working parents who still want to volunteer in town, and they might be able to help us, with some of the data. It's an interesting way to look at it, and I appreciate the suggestion. So that's going to be on our next list. Dylan, we haven't heard much from you. Do you have any questions on what we're doing here?
No, it seems pretty clear. I've been listening along, and I think I met with you and Amy a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago to kind of go over this stuff as well. So I'm all set. Thanks. Good.
And happy to get together, Stu, with you, or Jeremy as well with you anytime. What I'd like us to do is get this to a point where maybe it is 70 or 80%, 75 or 80% accurate. We can start with that. That's great. Once we're at that threshold, what I would then like to do is just focus on the categories. Adam,
before you run too far, I think you might be doing it backwards. No offense. Which is, if we haven't agreed on taxonomy, then when we're spot checking things, we can also fill in the things that need to be filled in, rather than having to go back and do it twice. Like, I need to know all the fields I'm checking for.
So you mean, so when you're.
So if I'm spot checking the list and I say,
I understand.
Just,
you want to, when you're spot checking that list, you want to check multiple data points at once instead of having to redo it.
Personally, I'd rather not be myself spot checking any of it, but I'm willing to do it, but I definitely don't want to do it twice.
So
I think that makes sense. Why don't I send out today the existing categories that we have, the suggested ones that we use, and then ask for everybody's response. Today's Tuesday, by
2 weeks.
No, I mean, as far as the categories, I don't think that should take too long. I would say
a week,
within 48 hours. Well, okay, no, I mean,
everybody's
busy, but sometimes you give people too long and then sort of falls off the radar.
Okay.
So let's just get that out of the way. And then as far as the spot checking, I don't see any reason that it couldn't be finished a week from this Friday.
The other thing is, the zoning districts are not really complete and may not be accurate. That's going to be a bit more labor intensive because it involves going back to the zoning map, and I don't know that we can get members on this committee to necessarily spend that additional time. And Jeremy, it is going to be imperfect, but we just want to start. I think the core data we want to determine is it, how reliable is it? Number one, and number two, what are the top categories that that we'll focus on, and then we'll have to leave adding accuracy perhaps to a different alternative to complete that. So ideally at our next meeting, we'll then be able to do some kind of graphing on Excel to, based on those categories, what we currently have. And that will be, that's going to lead to a more substantive discussion about, I think at that point, we then want to identify the clusters as most important. And what is most important, I think we would all agree, is, the number of jobs that sector employs and the breadth of those jobs. In other words, you need executives, you need managers, and you need entry-level staff, at almost any kind of a business, whether that's whether that's a bank, whether it's IT, whether it's a medical practice or a law firm or a real estate agent. You may have one person who does all three if it's a small business, etc. So the point is, we want to pick off those top. And then what I'd like to do is have us go out into the field and maybe we do it, in a partnership. Maybe, Dylan, you and Amy go meet with 5 executives in the IT space. Stu, you and I might take 5 in another sector, and Jeremy, you and I may take 5 of another sector. And then although before that, we have to determine what the questions are that we're going to ask. And then we'll all ask the same questions and we'll go out into the field. And then we'll report back as a subsequent meeting, which will then help us determine are there any missing segments in the food chain of that sector. And then if there aren't any, that's great. If there are some, what are they? And then we have a discussion, and maybe it becomes a bit of a broader discussion. We may want to bring in some other people to interview and have a conversation about what programs do we develop to attract those missing segments that would help grow our advantage or expand this particular sector in our town. Does that make sense?
I think, excuse me, I think we just got to do first things first, right? So let's do one step at a time. Let's verify some data, get ourselves that the data is reasonably accurate, and then we can reconvene and talk about the things that we want to follow up on. So
Yeah.
I have the first step in place. Let's go ahead and do it, and then let's set up some sort of review and see how that data goes.
That's helpful. I just wanted to give people a little bit of a roadmap of what I see happening. So that's where we'll start. That'll give us a bit of a game plan. Does anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Jeremy? Okay. Amy, do you have anything else to?
Nope. I will send out the email before the end of the day today on the categories. And if everybody could get back to me by, say, end of day Thursday, and let me know, that way we can get started on it. And then I will, I've actually already made a couple of more tweaks it's like going down a rabbit hole when I see this list. I can't help myself. So I will send all of you sort of the most updated list of the business inventory. So that
every time you send it out, or every time you play with it, save it as that day.
Or ideally, I could just put it up on Google Docs. That way, I don't want to confuse the folks by sending out multiple copies of something. I think that actually creates a chance that we may be working off of different copies. If it's a Google Doc, we'll be looking at the same thing live.
So then if it turns out that Stu finds that 2 businesses no longer exist, should he himself cut those businesses off the master list and put it on some category of dead businesses? Jeremy, you're shaking.
No, one owner of the data.
Okay.
You were going to nominate you, but I think you want to keep that under one.
I would agree.
Okay. All right. So none of us will make the change, but the master list will exist as a Google Doc. So that's fine.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So I think with that, we kind of hit what we wanted to today, does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add?
Just a question, because I'm doing a little bit of traveling. So Amy, you're going to send out this list, or you're going to send out the categories by end of day tomorrow, today, whatever it is. We get back to you. When do we get the list to go, in final form, to go analyze our 25? Muted.
Oh my gosh, you'd think after 2 straight years of Zoom. I can upload that to Google Docs by end of day as well. and send you
Okay.
guys the link so you can get started on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna be doing a little traveling, so I'm not sure if you had talked about, I think, the end of next week or something.
Yeah, I mean, we can
Before the
say,
end of this week, you're saying?
no,
Just send the data
I was
out.
saying the end of, I can get the data out to everybody by, by end of day today, early tomorrow morning. And I was saying if we had the spot checks done by the 20th, which is a week from this Friday, but if that seems too soon, then we can push it out 2 weeks.
Yeah, I only because I'm gonna be traveling, so it may be a bit tough for me. Maybe the following week is a little.
Yeah, that's fine. We can say by the 25th.
See if I can get something done.
Yeah,
But-
okay,
Okay,
that works. Terrific. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
So we have a motion by Stu and a second by Jeremy. I'll take a roll call vote. Stu Agler,
I vote to adjourn.
Dylan,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Okay, see you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.